Four rows a single barrel, for those of you that are curious. But anyway, the last video involving the so-called interview by Piers Morgan with Nick Fuentes did quite well, and seeing as it was mainly focused on simply reviewing what happened, I thought I would do a follow-up on why Fuentes not only won, but was always going to win. A more theoretical and philosophical deep dive, if you will. But before I get into that, I want to address a silly comment I saw from a while before, asking if my distancing myself from Fuentes was based on some kind of fear for my safety. I'm not English, and I've never lived in England for one, but no one's going to knock on my door because I said something positive about Nick Fuentes. Hell, I don't think anyone around me would even know who he is. I did that not because of some concern for my safety, it's because I hope to separate myself from the personalities involved and focus more on the substance being discussed. Rarely does that ever work, by the way, but if someone gets on my case, I can point to that and call them idiots if they don't heed my words, is my point. But I'll give my honest opinion on Nick, so I'll say the following. This is political, and all the world's a theater, which is a sugar-coated way of saying assume it's all cringe and gay. Nick was barred, debanked, in the political wilderness for years on end. And now he's featured by the New York Times, and virtually no one else has found any of that kind of strange. That in itself, to me, is rather peculiar. Now, whether he's highlighted to breathe life into the dying embers of more racism or mainstream to have his edge dulled and his fanbase neutered, brought into the fold, is anyone's guess. But let's get back to the interviewer here, shall we? Now, Piers Morgan had a bunch of obstacles to overcome when it came to this interview. But the biggest problem Piers Morgan had going in is the fact that he's Piers Morgan. And Piers Morgan is an utterly unimpressive, unremarkable specimen. The fact the only thing remotely impressive about him is his net worth, about $30 million apparently. But even that has an Achilles heel. It's arguably the prime factor responsible for his mentality. He can afford to not suffer the consequences of the typical delusional worldview espoused by his disconnected ilk. He is quite the NIMBYist. Not in my backyard if you're unfamiliar with the phrase. Aside from that, he's 60 years old. He's not young, he's not attractive, he's not athletic, he's not strong, he's not intellectually thought-provoking at all. He's a verbal poking device. Despite the fact that he's technically Gen X, he's spiritually a boomer. He's a typical male feminist, overly feminized, utterly emasculated, basic bitch shitlip boomer. Which would explain why his wife hasn't remembered their anniversary for almost a straight decade and why she cucks him, openly mocking him on social media, insinuating that she will shag anyone but him. A fact that many people seem to be aware of now, and as a consequence, the man who once claimed he has thick skin seems to have had that eviscerated, given that he recently went on this banning spree on social media, with many flashing their blocked by Piers Morgan badges as some kind of an amusing status symbol, which I did as well because it's funny. Now, many of these things added together is why Piers Morgan has the reputation he does. Go ask your average Englishman, tell me the first word that comes to mind. Piers Morgan. Guarantee you among the top 5 you will hear twat, wanker, punchable, or see you next Tuesday. Guarantee you. Maybe throw in Bell in there as well. But never mind even all of that. There's another glaring piece of information that completely slipped Piers by. Not a surprise when your head's firmly up your own ass and bloated by a massive ego. I'll let you lot decide what's funny being bloated, his head or his ass. But anyway, again, Piers is 60 years old. Nick is 27. There's more than 30 years between them, and Piers, despite having over 8.6 million followers on X, doesn't seem to have the faintest clue how the internet works, who's on it, or given that he is renowned as one of the most unlikable media figures in all of England, unable to realize a substantial portion of those followers despise his guts and are just there to dogpile him when he inevitably talks a load of shite. And this is where things get comically stupid, borderline retarded. Again, Nick is 27. His entire audience is built online. I don't think I need to tell you lot this, but the internet is not comprised primarily of boomers. I could only find public information since April of 2023, when the YouTube channel hit 1 million subs. But even then, the largest viewing demographic for Piers' channel was ages 25 to 34, same as mine. Nearly 72% of the audience was under 44. That's Nick's audience. None of this is particularly difficult to find, mind you. It's standard information you can find with AI in seconds. Combine all of that, and you will see Piers' strategy for this so-called interview was so thick it almost invites suspicion. Here we have a stereotypical, out-of-touch, disconnected, elitist, basic bitch boomer of Boomerville with boomer values. And he thought he could saunter his cucked ass into Gen Z Avenue and chastise Gen Z for not adhering to said basic bitch boomer values. Now, Piers is so stupid he didn't realize the majority of the viewers were not going to be normies who've never even heard of Nick. Hell, I'd probably wager a lot of them were fans of him. Which means they didn't tune in to see who Fuentes is, nor they tuned in to watch Nick verbally kick Piers' ass. A feat he accomplished rather successfully, I would think, considering the comment section is so overwhelmingly in Nick's favor. Not to mention Piers' coping social media meltdown post-interview that lasted till the wee early hours of the following morning. Piers practically gave Nick home advantage and proceeded to play a highlight reel of his best bits to his face, to Nick's audience, and tried to get him to disavow himself. Piers Morgan went out of his way to stack the deck against Piers Morgan. I mean, this strategy was set to fail before the interview even began, just based on the variables I've listed. Again, this is all so dumb, it genuinely makes me suspicious. How did Piers think this was all going to go? But like I said before, Piers' attack was typical of the Boomer Truth regime. This man is a racist, misogynistic anti-Semite. Oh, whoop-de-fucking-do. What dippy-ass Piers has failed to realize, those are three labels the viewing audience overwhelmingly couldn't give a flying toss about. Then we get into the so-called interview, which was obviously an attempted hit job. Come on, everyone knows it. It's why everyone warned Nick what Piers was going to do, being a predictable, talentless wanker. Speaking on that, Nick mentioned something that I thought was quite interesting. He said it wasn't an ambush because an ambush must contain some elements of surprise, and no one was surprised by Piers' behavior, especially when he outright stated his plan of attack about 20 minutes in. Nick makes a good point. Now, I actually thought that Piers, if he hadn't already failed, he was heavily favored to fail the moment he brought up Nick's father, for a whole bunch of reasons. Mainly that you can't presume to hold the moral high ground when you're attacking a young man's father who isn't even there to defend himself. I get that it was to throw Nick off balance. It is highly unexpected after all, because only complete would try something so low and classless. But it's like throwing a boomerang at someone's shin only for it to come back and hit you in the fucking eye. Nick was evidently able to recover from that, and Piers showed just how despicable he can actually be. Which leads us to the next problem, and this is something that you will notice not just with Piers, but boomers in general. Aside from the fact that he never even bothers to understand Nick's perspective on any front at all, boomers seem to live in this bizarre world where perspectives built on real-world experience or learning from the experience of others simply doesn't exist, at least when it comes to social issues anyway, which is objectively insane. Like I said before, is why anti-discrimination laws don't work, because the discrimination is based on behavior, not these arbitrary characteristics. And boomers seem completely unable to understand any of this. I don't know if it's because they've been heavily propagandized or they're just thick, but anyone who's ever tried talking to boomers can attest to this. Let's examine the claim that Nick's father refused to take his son to certain restaurants due to the demographics. Nick is 27, so born in 98. In the 90s, the decade of tough-on-crime Clintonian politics. Really? Never mind that, anyone who's into politics and has been on social media has undoubtedly seen scores of videos of a certain melanated variety, shall we say, who carry on like uncivilized menaces to society, starting fights, sometimes at the point of death, throwing plates, food, chairs, Waffle House Wendy, anyone? Why on earth would he take his children to an establishment patroned by this potential behavior? I mean, anyone with half a functioning noggin can do a basic timeline analysis like I just did. This isn't some gotcha about the foundations of Nick's so-called racism. This just shows Nick's father has a brain with functioning pattern recognition. Then of course came Piers' inability, so-called, to understand proportion, as he failed the per capita test, allegedly, to an audience of millions. A test has been memed so often to high heaven at this point, it made me think of a name for this particular phenomenon. And seeing as I think these people are all empty cogs of code, I'm going to amusingly call it the DOS prompt. Disingenuous or stupid? Ah yes, the perpetual question. Now in Piers' case, it's most certainly both, but he is definitely more disingenuous than he is stupid. I still can't believe he took the disingenuous route when it came to per capita. It really is like a meme version of writing "kick me" on your forehead. Then when he failed that, he went to round 2, the Austrian painter. And this one, my word, this is such a glorious faceplant, I don't even know where to start, really. To say this portion backfired would be the understatement of the decade. And for this segment, Piers decided to recruit some help in his efforts to chastise Nick, because that worked so well the first fucking time round. It's no wonder Nick mugged him saying, "What is this, a lecture?" Enter Daniel Finkelstein, who made his appearance shortly after Piers made the claim he knows of no one who exploits certain world events for their own gain. As he mentions a man who wrote a book about it, who then proceeds to plug it on Piers' own show. This same git would then go on to reply to someone on X suggesting to give Fuentes the book for free, saying no, he can buy a copy. Caricatures are one thing, but this is beyond fucking parody. The level of arrogance and complete lack of any self-awareness, it's like you want people to hate you. And by the way, he will have the phrase "my mum" memed at him for the rest of his remaining days. Now, since this exposure moment went massively viral, two things have predictably happened. One, he's done the thing every idiot does when they get exposed, damage control, which is never going to work because two, you're only one man, and the internet's full of many and authors who will go to town on your ass, especially if you're full of shit. You know, now that I've said that out loud, I should perhaps try and rephrase that one, but anyway, they can't help themselves. And so every stupid thing he says will now get massively amplified and likely ratioed to high heaven because prior to the Fuentes fiasco, no one knew or cared who the hell this bloke even was. Now he's just making the rounds, milking anything with a pulse for sympathy as the internet treats him as a piñata full of memes. I mean, a while ago he tangled with Rupert Lowe about the state of London, suggesting it's oh so terribly safe. At which point he proceeded to get absolutely mauled into oblivion in the replies, again not a surprise, up until the Barney attacks in Australia, mere hours later. And then oh suddenly he doesn't feel so safe anymore. Because there's something that happened on the other side of the bloody world. Oh, but the problem is people like Fuentes are not the foreign horde. Again, they have no shame, none. Now how does this all relate back to Piers? Well, Piers did say, oh, it was wrong for him to get debanked, and he supports free speech, and that he is apparently critical of a certain government in the Middle East. Funny that, Piers, seeing as your shilling guest doesn't agree with you on either, and that's hardly a surprise, your only consistency is rage bait and shitlip hypocrisy. Turns out the enemy of my enemy is, useful, apparently. Now, Fuentes handled it brilliantly, mind you, and I don't just mean the too soon line, which was admittedly hilarious. But he came out swinging, essentially saying, who the hell is this person in relation to me? He doesn't even know me or live in America, bollocks to him. Which is fair enough, really. I mean, just look at this situation neutrally from the outside for a moment. We have an Englishman and some whinging git, both over 60, mind you, lecturing a young American man about his opinion on something that happened in fucking Germany, which neither of them featured in, by the way, about 80 years ago. It looks absurd. And as usual, there is no conversation as to why any of that happened. Oh, suddenly this man came to power for no reason whatsoever. And then, of course, we had this bit.
And what do you mean by Hitler is very fucking cool? Because I think he's very fucking a monster.
Okay. That's a clip. I think he's very fucking a monster. Do you hear yourself?
Yeah, I mean,
can we all grow up?
I do.
Can we all grow up?
He murdered 12
that is
million
childish.
people. He murdered 12 million people. What is very fucking cool about that? Tell me.
The edits.
Now, if you watch the rest of that, Piers, of course, doesn't address anything Nick says in answering the question. No, he just moves on to the next bit, because in Piers' delusional, conceited mind, he thinks Fuentes' answer can't possibly be compelling in any way whatsoever just based on the question. Then, of course, we had our last one. Women. Now, just keep in mind how things look for the people involved here thus far. Piers thinks he's on cloud 9. After smearing Nick as a racist anti-Semite, let's go racist, anti-Semitic, misogynist, because fuck it, why not? Go for the unholy trinity of Boomerism. The vast majority of the viewing audience, however, can see Piers' pathetic failing strategy and thinks he's an obsolete tool. Because he is. And if they were watching it live, they were giddy, salivating at what the comment section would look like. Being a 60-year-old man, calling yourself a Catholic, trying to humiliate a male less than half your age because he hasn't engaged in premarital sex, is painfully cringe, borderline creepy. Suggesting it shaped his perception of women in politics is, well, frankly retarded, considering there's many men who have had sex, are fathers, and have the perspectives of women that Nick does. So clearly shagging them isn't going to magically prevent men from noticing they still say and do stupid shit. Why you would sim for modern women, God only knows. Notice no one pays attention to the dissenting women who also share Nick's opinion on the ovarian variety. I wonder why that is. It's rather ironic he calls Nick the dinosaur when he is the outdated fossil over here with all the political perspectives of a college-drowned soy boy. Why you would boast about sex when you look like that and your wife openly cucks you for the entire world to see is beyond colossal moron. Again, Piers' performance is so incompetent I can't shake the feeling it wasn't a work. It was like the Ben Shapiro takedown, or so-called rather. It was nothing but a live highlight reel. I had the same question watching that as I do this. Who was this for? And asking that, here's my reading of the entire ordeal. It plays out like Piers wasn't talking to Nick, but rather through him, and virtue signaling to his cosmopolitan butt buddies, and really that's about as far as it goes. And Nick, knowing this, was just dunking on Piers for the audience's amusement. But there is something peculiar about Piers' behavior, because despite him being on the or rather trying to be on the offensive throughout this exchange, nevertheless he still radiates this energy that just screams massive submissive bitch. And here's the reason why. You see, any tribe or society or civilization has a set of cultural norms and customs, sets of accepted beliefs that develop over generations that keep the social fabric intact. Men make it and women enforce it. Or rather, masculine energy creates it and feminine energy aids in the enforcement. And Piers has taken it upon himself to adopt a damn near entirely feminine position, the obsequious enforcer of the Boomer Truth regime, because the only arrow in his narrow-lacking quiver is shame. Now, whether that's him or just the format, who the hell knows, but anyway. Actually, the whole clash of thoughts can be perfectly surmised through this bit right here.
They're always coming up with, no, it's not the Jews. No, it's not women. No, it's not blacks. It's actually really complicated. No, it fucking isn't at all. Jews are running society. Women need to shut the fuck up. Blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part. And we would live in paradise. It's that simple.
Okay.
Not gonna lie, I do for myself chuckling at his approving head. It's very subtle.
Would you like to clarify what you meant there?
How about you clarify why you chose that clip, you pretentious little shit? I could almost do a whole video on just this exchange, because there's so many rakes in the face here, it's unreal. See, to Piers' ilk, this moment is like the trifecta of peak boomer heresy. In his mind, this is a massive own. Him playing this is him whipping out a gun, aiming for Nick's feet, and going, "Dance, monkey boy!" But again, this would backfire spectacularly, since Nick pretty much booby-trapped it at the start there by saying, it's actually really complicated. No, it fucking isn't. Because again, anyone who knows why Piers chose that clip knows Nick is also correct. Hence why he says this.
That's all true. That's 100% true. Everything I said in that clip is true.
You see what I mean with the rakes in the face? The fact that Nick doesn't need to clarify at all and just doubles down is pretty much self-explanatory at this point. Let's be real here, shall we? What's more jarring is Piers doesn't pause and ask himself why Nick is so confident in rejecting the need for clarification. But of course, Piers, being the idiot that he is, desperate for his viral gotcha moment, says this.
Oh, so you're talking about black people who murder people?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
But you didn't say that.
That's
you
the
just
crime
said
problem.
blacks need to be imprisoned for the most part.
Again, he doesn't need to clarify like we're all blind drooling vegetables over here. Everyone knows what he means. He just said imprisoned, which implies they've committed a crime, you fucking moron. Frankly, I don't know what's worse, the disingenuousness or the patronization. This line of questioning, at best, will get you many a fuck off. At worst, punch because you're fucking irritating. It's so bizarre because on the one hand, Piers, you carry on as if these values come from nothing, plucked from the ether, out of thin air, as if they're just there. But on the other hand, implying you either don't care or are too stupid to understand or articulate how or why your values are necessary. Which is quite odd considering you're using shame to keep them in wind. And this is the crux of the problem, because these so-called values are functionaries. And if you can't define what those functions are, you will be exposed when someone else can show them to be failing or worse, counterproductive. Both of which will leave you vulnerable and lacking credibility when someone challenges you with a better set of values with the power and will to enforce them. Take a look at the three Piers chose to smear Nick with. Again, everyone knows the problems. But what does Piers do? Well, never mind how or why they got there. His only recourse is to ignore and then try his lackluster bollocks off to smear and shame the ones that don't. What, so I'm just supposed to ignore this group is vastly disproportionately violent? I'm supposed to ignore the fact that every disadvantaging social change that harmed my civilization was overwhelmingly supported by women? I'm supposed to ignore this group having an ungodly amount of sway over my country's political apparatus to the point it looks like it's under the control of a foreign power? I'm supposed to ignore the fact that every instance of my kin being displaced by someone not of European origin has resulted in everything getting worse. Why? Why on earth would I ignore all of these things? How does this course of action benefit me or my society in any way whatsoever? Not only are you asking people to ignore glaring growing problems in basic pattern recognition, you're demanding people under penalty of shame voluntarily retard themselves to keep a failing system failing. This is not only insane, it's suicidal. No civilization would voluntarily do any of this. So why are we being subjected to this deranged experiment? Simple. World War II and never again. Never again, Mr. Horrors of World War II, blah, 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 whatever. No one under 45 cares about any of this bollocks. But their answer to my question, why should ethnic Europeans allow access to their land, their people, their resources and capital to those who don't share the traditions, heritage, values, gods and bloodlines, is essentially because we'll get the Third Reich. So their goal is to ignore all aspects of human history and human psychology, destroy all traces of tribalism, heritage, and the very concept of the nation-state itself, except their own, of course, all to try and year zero the entire Western world. The most pernicious combination of blank slate theory and rampant consumerism. All humans can be boiled down to two traits: a desire to devour and fuck, and that's all. The worldview of the boomers is built on nothing more than soulless materialism, which is why trying to articulate to them a world where things are valued beyond mere dollar signs is virtually impossible. The boomers are spiritually bankrupt. And it seems embarking on this Sisyphean task of colossal revolutionary idiocy ironically ends up creating fucking Weimar. The youth look back at previous generations, previous iterations of Western civilization. They see men who are masculine, women who are feminine, men in suits, women in dresses, beautiful architecture, classical pieces of music, periods of grace, of splendor, of refinement, their people and their works glorified and celebrated. A time where men could get married and single-handedly support an entire family. A time where society had a functioning, orderly hierarchy. The pre-globalized world. And then they look at our civilization, a corrupted multicultural cesspool, a lifeless monstrosity of concrete, steel, and glass, an eye-raping assault on the senses. The people are increasingly weaker-willed, overweight, and obese, with no signs of self-respect whatsoever, tolerating grotesque levels of violence, drug abuse, and rampant sexual degeneracy, legions of poisoned human souls, vast and mighty empires that once spanned and ruled the globe have now been reduced to this, decaying ruins now being drained by a never-ending horde of parasites that care for nothing more than fueling their own insatiable appetites of greed. The young see all of this and rightfully ask, why the hell would any of us follow your values when this is what you have birthed? Here is something no one wants to say because it's a cornerstone of the current paradigm, but radical individualism is a complete crock of wank. When you are born into a collective, your family. And from this, your neighborhood, your town, your city, your province, your nation, your kin. You're never an individual. Tribalism is in your blood, and there is no amount of politics that is ever going to undo the hardwire that is your DNA. Think about this logically. The moment you encounter anything with life, any and all lines of inquiry, which is to determine is it a threat to you, is based on collective information. We judge and determine based on said accumulated collective information. Age, weight, sex, religion, wealth, education, nationality, ethnicity, so on and so forth. There is no such thing as individualism in this sense. Information never exists in a solo vacuum. It objectively can't. It needs to be compared and contrasted against something else to have any value. The collective will and always will triumph over the individual. Which brings us to the allure of the Reich. The images and captions of a nation once sullied and belittled by the Allied powers breaks through the rotten corruption of the Weimar Republic and embraces the spirit of a resurgent animating zeal, towering works of vitality and vigor. Scores of high-hoisted banners, parades of armored war machines, and legions of stylishly dressed military men marching lockstep in unison adorns the German landscape. New life is breathed into the dwindling embers, the mighty eagle reborn, brimming with a desire for conquest and conquer, ready to reclaim its honor and reinscribe its name into the annals of great nation glory. See, what the Wehrmacht represents is not just raw military might, but a regime outspokenly unified by a mythos of clan and kinship, honoring the fatherland through blood and soil. It's not a belief in an idea, it's a belief in its people. The Germans are not like everyone else. The German is superior. Now contrast that to our timeline, where our lineage and heritage has been all but discarded as outdated and dangerous. To see a regime openly glorify its genes as better and worthy is inspiring. No democracy, no equality, no sclerotic rot of checks and balances, just an unstoppable powerhouse in sixth gear. It showcases the prowess of a people, a destiny beyond the mere shallow world of materialism, a rallying battle cry that speaks to the inner spirit far more than being an atomized individual whose sole worth is being a cog of blanket production and increasing the GDP. That is what it ultimately represents, and what the current paradigm has robbed from its men, place and purpose. There's not a moral justification for the regime, merely why does it appeal and resonate. As far as Nick and the Mustache Man goes, I'm not really that bothered by it, frankly, because he also said he liked Stalin. Well, considering they were enemies, well, eventually anyway, my conclusion from that would be Nick is a 19th century minded fellow who believes in great man theory. That's it. Hell, I'll even steal my Nick's worldview, because it's very easy to defend. All you have to do is remove the most obnoxious mind bubble of the current timeline, presentism. He acknowledges the reality of tribalism, and as such is skeptical of any foreign agents occupying the halls of power, because the state is duty-bound to prioritize his kin before all others. This position is in no way radical. This is bog-standard statecraft for almost all of human history. That's the dumbest thing about our timeline. What is accepted mainstream political discourse is completely insane and vapid, and anything that's remotely functional is not politically feasible. There's no wonder the next generation is eyeing a swinger autocracy. They've become increasingly disillusioned with democracy, and who the hell can blame them? Rightfully so, it's hopelessly cringe and gay. Cheers for watching, and once again, I apologize for nothing.